Hi there, this is Eric with the California Climbing School. I'm going to show you 3 different ways to rack up for a trad climb. First with the padded shoulder gear sling, like this, then with a double gear sling, and then finally with no sling at all with all the gear on your harness. So they all have pros and cons. This is my least favorite method here, the first one I ever learned, and you know, it's fast to hand the gear over to your partner when you're swapping leads on a multi-pitch instead of having to hand the gear off one piece at a time, so that's good. It is a little irritating how when you're climbing this, all the pro hangs in the front sometimes, and then it can block your view of your footwork. And as you raise your leg, it interacts with the gear, so you're constantly having to slide the gear behind you before you make a move. So if you are going to use this method, probably want to go small in the front and then work your way towards larger pieces in the back. You can always find the big ones. They're big, but the small ones are hard to find. So let's put them where they're easier to find in the front, okay? If that's a little heavy, you can take some of your larger cams and put them on the rear of your front gear loops. I use the rear gear loops for anchor building materials and rescue materials. Now, let me show you how to use a double gear sling, which is currently my favorite method. The problem with that single sling is that I ended up having to get knots worked out of my shoulder on the right side because I'd always wear it on the right side. So I had to get some body work. And then I worked it over on the left side, had the same problem on the left, started switching sides. But then eventually I went to my double gear sling, which I bought for Big Wall originally. And then I found, gosh, it's just so comfortable and practical for just everyday use. So what I do with this is a Black Diamond Zodiac padded gear sling. It's not a chest harness. It's not full strength. It's just for the gear. And so I go with my small to medium on the one side. Then I go medium to large on the other side. Another way to do it would be, let's say you're doubled up on one side. You can put one of each on either side. Okay, so you're balanced. So that's just personal preference, how you like to rack it. But have a system and stick with your system so you know where your gear is. You probably want to have all the beaners, the carabiners facing gate in. On the rack facing gate out is just less ergonomic. However, on your harness, that's where tastes differ. I am a gate out guy. I find that is easier to get off, but some people like the gate in, so experiment and see what you like there, okay? Now in terms of weight, once again, we can take some of the larger cams and put them on the back of the rear loops, okay? Just make sure that when you're reaching for your draws, reach from the front or the middle, because if you reach from the back, you're going to accidentally get a cam. If you have some real big cams, boy, these are pretty heavy, so the weight is going to ride better on your harness than on your shoulders, okay? Which brings up an interesting discussion point, which has to do with how your body is shaped. Now, if you are a guy and you don't have hips like me, then you put too much weight on your harness and it starts to work its way down, sliding off your hips gradually, and that's a safety problem. So I have to constantly keep hiking up my harness. So the more weight on my harness, the worse that problem is. Now, if you're a woman with a nice hip shelf, maybe you can put all kinds of weight on your hips and it doesn't bother you. Plus, a guy with bigger shoulders, they're not going to mind having more weight on the upper body, whereas a woman who has the lower center of gravity is probably going to prefer a little bit more weight on the hips. So it really does vary depending on your body type and your personal preferences, okay? So let's take a look at the final method. Now let's take a look at how you can rack all the gear on your harness. So what I've done is I've bunched up my protection. So I've got 2 of the same size right here, one clipped to the other. Make sure that you're grabbing the lower carabiner so you don't grab both cams at once, right? So those match. These match. Doing the same thing over here, right? So same sizes grouped together. And I've bunched up my quick draws as well, right? So just like this. Okay, I find it less ergonomic to have the gate facing forward. I find that is more awkward than this, okay? And I bunched up my alpine draws together and then my sport draws together. A lot of times I'll go with 6 of each type. That works well for a lot of routes for traditional climbing. And then if you look at this draw right here, one thing I would probably change before I lead is I would probably flip around this carabiner right here. That way you see, if I have it upside down and I'm clipping my rope into it, I've got to do one more step, which is to flip it over. Why don't I flip it over now before I lead the pitch so it's ready to go for the clip as I'm leading? So these are all personal preference tips, so you're just going to have to experiment and see what you like. If your hip is going to be grinding up against a side wall as you're climbing, then consider putting less gear on that side and putting it on the other side. I hope this was a helpful discussion, and please make some comments and share your favorite racking tips for others. Thank you.